54% of the world's steel is made in one country. Now, you've probably guessed it already, China. We look at rare earth minerals. 60% of them are mined in one country, China. 70% of the world's drones, and on and on and on. The manufacturing might of China really does surprise you when you look back at the numbers. And we're going to do that today. Hey everyone, welcome to the Poplar Report. I'm Steve Poplar. I'm an accountant by trade, so yeah, I do numbers research. I dig into stuff. I don't just regurgitate a news article to you. I try to do a lot more behind-the-scenes research. If you want to check out more research, you can check out our page at thepoplarreport.com. One of those sites, right? Thepoplarreport.com. You can see it's like Drudge Report, and I put up my my links to different news articles and stuff like that I've seen, and hopefully in the future I'll start posting more independent research on that page. I'm working to bring some people on and everything like that. We're trying to develop this so that we can impact the national conversation around a lot of these things about what's happening over in China, as well as food shortages in the United States, and just becoming more self-sufficient as a country. And if you think that's a worthwhile thing to do, you can always join our membership. I'm trying to gather a crew of people who believe in that vision and want to help work towards making that happen. And there's going to be some volunteer opportunities with that as well. Thanks so much for supporting us. Let's jump into the numbers here. So China produces 54% of the world's steel. In a war, steel is kind of important. You make tanks out of it, you make ships out of it, you even make a lot of components for aircraft out of it. There's a lot of things that you build out of steel. When bridges get blown up, you need to rebuild them with steel. The United States went into World War II with a massive advantage in steel production over a lot of these other countries. Russia did not really have all that much industrial base. When we look at Germany, they had a lot of steel capacity and production, and that's what partially made them so strong in World War II. But now things are very lopsided. China produces 54% of the world's steel. The second largest steel producer in the world is India at 6.6%. And the United States is around 4%. Okay, just to give you an idea there. Japan is number 3 at 4.8% of the world's steel is produced in Japan. Friends, 54% is produced in China. It's crazy. When we look at rare earth minerals, we're going to touch back on steel when we come back to some of these other things that are necessary, like shipbuilding. And we're going to be talking about even going into computer chips and what an invasion of Taiwan would really change for China. So rare earth minerals, 60% is mined in China. And now that's something that sounds bad, and that's where politicians and stuff like that, Swalwell over there is in Congress is helping, like, let's mine more in the United States. Well, mining's not really the issue. 40% of the world's rare earth minerals are actually mined outside of China. But see, 91% of rare earth minerals are refined in China. A lot of the refining process for a lot of these minerals, now you make magnets out of these things, which are used in a lot of high-end electronics, a lot of applications for radios, and a lot of things like that, a lot of moving parts. So if you want to take an F-35 fighter jet and you stack up how many rare earth minerals, I think it's like 50 pounds of rare earth minerals or something like that goes into a fighter jet like that. So where's all that coming from? It's all coming from China. They are making 94% of the world's magnets. So when you buy an EV from Elon Musk or one of these other car companies, those magnets are coming from China. That's right. A lot of the high-tech stuff that we have out there is coming from China because they are willing to do the nasty industrial processes to refine the ore down into actual magnets. And believe me, the toxic sludge and toxicity of the waste products from these processes is ridiculous. The areas where they refine a lot of these rare earth minerals It looks like a wasteland because the industrial pollution is just so bad. No Western country wants that happening inside their country. And so what do? We give it all to China. Just like no Western country wants to really do steel making anymore because it's dirty, dangerous. And so we just let China do it all. And this may have seemed like a good idea at first. Let's just make them do all the dirty work. But the dirty work is where wars are won. 70% of the world's drones are made in China. Think about that. We're moving into a world where drones are kind of an essential part of technology for warfare. 70% of the world's drones are made in China. They have all the technology. They understand how to make these drones, and they can mass produce them for warfare. And the rest of the world is falling behind on that. Not only that, but when we look at automobiles, China produces 3 times the number of cars that the United States produces. China is now the top, just recently became the top exporter of cars in the world. They are moving into car manufacturing in a big way. Remember, it was the auto manufacturers in the United States that switched over to making tanks. They switched the assembly lines from making cars to making tanks, making aircraft, making other things. It is those assembly lines and those workers that were so critical in winning World War II. And now China is not only making all these cars for themselves and making vehicles and trucks and buses, but these assembly lines in China can easily and quickly be transferred over to making military vehicles. Think about that. And we're not just talking about vehicles as in cars and buses, and let's talk about ships. The United States just doesn't make many ships. When you look at commercial ships, the United States makes very, very few. Most of the ships that the United States makes anymore are naval vessels. The United States has 7 naval shipyards. China has 13. And you say, well, the United States ones are just bigger. Well, that's not true either. One of the Chinese shipyards, they have a massive shipyard. It actually has the production capacity of all the United States shipyards combined. Now, I understand that China is still trying to get up to date with the technology, still trying to get better with the quality control issues and everything like that. But the simple fact is that they can crank out twice as many naval ships and then some than the United States can. Not that the United States is, but that the United States can. And they are continuing to expand their capability. They now have more Navy ships on the ocean than the United States does. This is a situation where this is very concerning. People inside, defense and think tanks and all that kind of stuff like that, they're looking at the paper and going, if we got into a fight with China that was a prolonged fight, they could just simply outproduce us. They can produce more missiles, they can produce more artillery shells, they can produce more tanks, they can produce more people, they can produce more ships. Not only that, but they are making a ton of civilian ships. 44% of the world's new tonnage of ships coming online every year come from China. 44% of the ships in the world are made in China. Not just naval ships, but civilian ships. And those things can quickly be turned into, you have a cargo vessel that has shipping containers on it. They've already designed the club, as they call it, the missile systems that package up into a shipping container. So when you see a ship full of shipping containers, who knows if that top layer of shipping containers is actually missile batteries? You can imagine being a commander of a carrier task force that's going across the ocean, and every cargo ship you see, you have to ask yourself, is this cargo ship actually a missile battery? That's a big problem. It's a big problem because they can put these missile batteries on any cargo ship that they want to, that they have control over. And who's to say? And 44% of all the ships in the world by tonnage, are made in China. 85% of the world's shipping containers, just to give you an idea of the dominance that China has out there when it comes to manufacturing. Now, you look at the specifications for shipping containers. I've long held to this. How much different is a shipping container fundamentally than to landing craft that were made in World War II? They kind of look the same. They're kind of boxy, and they kind of, you could almost take a shipping container, make some cuts, re-weld the front doors down at an angle to give it a little bit of a bow, and then put an engine on the thing, and you basically have a World War II landing craft. We talk about, well, will China really be able to get all these troops over to the mainland Taiwan? They might be able to if they just simply turn shipping containers into landing craft and just send a wave of 1 million soldiers across all in one go. I mean, Taiwan doesn't have enough missiles to sink every little landing craft. And that's just the kind of stuff we're talking about. When you have the manufacturing capability to do something like that very quickly, how do you counter that? What happens if they turn some of these major production lines over into missile production or missile batteries? Or, it's just the amount of production in China is off the charts. And when it comes to them deciding to fight a war with someone, they're going to be able to pivot their industrial might, and it's going to be something ugly. But let's go beyond metal and physical weapons and everything like that, and let's talk about the world's antibiotics. 90% of the world's antibiotics come from one country, China. Now, I'm talking about, you can see the numbers and they don't seem like that because China is making the precursors, the active ingredient in the antibiotics, and then they're shipping that out to places like Germany, and they're shipping out to India, where it's put into capsules and marked up and everything like that. So you see these exports from India, and you see these exports from some places in Europe, and you're like, well, they actually produce a lot of drugs there. It's like, no, they don't produce the drugs. What they do is they produce the boxes, the names, they design the drugs, and then when you go to China, you see that they're the ones actually making the drugs. And that's a big problem. The United States has lost capability to make a whole bunch of the antibiotics. The strains that are used, the mold and stuff like that, they're used to actually manufacture the antibiotic powder and the active ingredients. A lot of those strains have been moved out of the United States into China, and the United States just doesn't have the capability to make them anymore. Could we restart production? It would be very costly and very difficult to research and to remanufacture the precursors for those things. And could it even be done? That's a question. Could it even be done? 90% of the world's antibiotics made in China. What happens if we go to war with them and they stop exporting it? Do you know how many people in the world would die within a year or 2 years if antibiotics around the world just dried up? In a conflict, in a major war, where there's lots and lots of casualties, lots of open wounds, and antibiotics are just not available? Are you seeing the problem here? We are so reliant upon China, and China has built this massive industrial facility that is very difficult. You say, well, the United States has all this high-tech stuff. Well, pretty much every high-tech thing requires computer chips. China currently makes about 15% of the world's computer chips. And you say, well, that's not too bad. But it's projected by 2030, they're going to be making 25% of the world's computer chips. They are actively moving forward with producing more and more of the world's computer chips. They're leveling up their manufacture. It's a high priority for them. Now, the United States has put sanctions upon China to make it so that no American experts are allowed to work with Chinese companies on semiconductors and computer chips anymore. And that's a big blow to China. But, and this is a big but, they can get those experts elsewhere. If they work for it, unless you can get everybody to sanction China, you can't actually stop the progress of their development. And they're very dead set on making that. What's worse What's worse is that 50% of the world's computer chips are made in one country. And yes, I said country, Taiwan. So if they're making 25% of the world's computer chips in China in 2030, and they invade Taiwan somewhere between now and then, that's right, by 2030 they'd be looking at controlling 75% of the world's production of silicon chips, semiconductors, computer chips. Friends, are you hearing how bad of shape we're in? How difficult it is when we look at going over there and just poking China as if there is never going to be consequences for that. China has been patient for a very long time with continued United States aggression, and it's hard not to see it that way. If you go over to China now, the people there actively are upset with the United States. Expats from the United States that have been working in China, I've heard from a lot of them. You can watch some of them on YouTube channels and such like that, where they used to teach English and do things in China, and they all moved out because the hostility, the open hostility on the streets from Chinese citizens towards Americans and even white Westerners is growing more and more intense. Someone was just recounting how they were in a restaurant in China, and it was a fancy restaurant, but they noticed that everybody was on their phones. Everyone was tracking some politicians from the United States' planes heading towards Taiwan. They were all watching these United States diplomats going to Taiwan and provoking China. And they were genuinely concerned. They said there was this one young couple that were there for like a anniversary or something like that, but they couldn't stop looking at their phones. They were all tracking United States, and that's something that the United States has done that like the United States doesn't even care about. No one in the United States was tracking those planes. Nobody in the United States was paying attention to this thing as if it's like some big provocation. And that's where we are. The United States is doing things that we don't really care about so much, that China deeply cares about. Their population has been indoctrinated to deeply care about. We are moving towards war. This is the same buildup we saw in Japan against foreigners back before World War II. This indoctrination, this feeling of being repressed and pushed down as Japan was feeling by Western powers. Now, they were doing aggressive things and doing bad things. You know, they were invading China and Korea and stuff like that. So obviously, I think the world should be putting pressure on them at that time in World War II. But China is currently doing a whole bunch of repressive, awful things to their own people and to the people that they've invaded in the recent years. And so I think that's I think criticism of the Chinese Communist Party is valid and important. But I think that we also see that we are on a trajectory, an inevitable trajectory towards war. And when we get into that war, we're going to find out that the manufacturing capability of China is very, very large. And the difference between the United States and China's manufacturing capabilities is going to be clearly seen in the next war. So folks, be thinking about that. You know, where are you buying your stuff? And just realize that when we go to war and everyone in the United States is rah, 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 we're going to win this thing in 30 days, be aware that it may not go that way. It may actually go where it takes a while and we end up losing. Don't believe the hype, folks. Look at the numbers. That's what we try to do on this channel. If you appreciate these videos, please make sure you hit the thumbs up button. And if you haven't already subscribed, please do subscribe. Help get our numbers up a little bit too. People look at those numbers when they're deciding what videos to watch and everything like that. I appreciate all of your support. And if you want to check out another video from this channel, there's one right up here. I'll see you guys over there, or I'll see you later. Steve Poplar of the Poplar Report out.